All right, everybody, we are excited to have another one of our talks in this series, the Digital Ethnic Studies speaker series, which began a year ago in the fall. The Digital Ethnic Studies Interdisciplinary Research Cluster is funded by the College of Arts and Letters Interdisciplinary Research Cluster Program. And so we're excited to have Souta Calling Last talking to us about her organization, which is both a nonprofit and a podcast, and all of the cool things she's doing with Indigenous communities through Indigenous Vision. So what I'm going to do today is, as I'm admitting folks into our meeting. We are recording this meeting just to be able to have a reference point for folks who are not able to be here today. So we'll post the recording to the Digital Humanities YouTube channel, and we'll email out the link to folks. So you can share it, you can watch it, you can distribute it to your classes, and so forth. I'm going to begin with an introduction for Souta, and then briefly make the land acknowledgement, and then Souta can take it away with her presentation. She's going to talk for a little while, and then the last 20-ish minutes or so will be for Q&A, which I hope will give us a chance to kind of ask some interesting questions and hear more from our participants and attendees at this talk today. So Souta Calling Last is the founder and executive director of Indigenous Vision. For 20 years, she has focused her efforts on water quality, mining contamination cleanup, and water treatment. She has a lifelong commitment to environmental stewardship and has experience in groundwater monitoring, watershed health, and community participatory-based research. She believes that land and Indigenous people are inextricably linked, and that sustainable land management must include Indigenous perspectives. In 2018, Souta was chosen for a Boldly Better Roddenberry Fellowship to pursue her interactive map of social, environmental, and climate injustices. She is a graduate of the University of Montana as well as the University of Phoenix. Souta holds a BA in Environmental Studies, Water Resources, and an MIM in Innovative Leadership and Change Management. Indigenous Vision MMIWarriors, IVMapping-CWD, Blackfoot, Placemap, and Food Forest projects, IVMedia, and cultural humility programs are how Indigenous Vision assists in the collective effort to revitalize Indigenous communities, people, land, and culture. So welcome, Souta, to SDSU. I believe you've been to SDSU before, so it's exciting to have you again. Let me go ahead with our land acknowledgement. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay.
Thank you, Dr. Sureshi. Oki nitaniku sutaki sakobahkomi. Numto tsitapi abate tsitapi ki amskapi pikani. Hello, everybody. In English, my name is Rain Woman, last one standing on the battlefield making the war cry, and I am from the Blackfeet Nations and the Blood Tribes, which are both Blackfoot people separated by the US-Canadian border, and our homelands are on the Rocky Mountain front, the plains, and all along the backbone, what we call the backbone of the world, or the Rocky Mountains. So I founded Indigenous Vision in 2015 as a way to take my education and my community organizing, because in 2011 and 2015, There was Bill C-45 in Canada that America and Canadian embassies down here in the United States got involved on, and it removed about 85, 90% of the water protections in Canada, except for around cottage country, they call it, and which is where like most of the millionaires have their homes, billionaires. And so that happened in 2011. And then a few years later, or right around the same time, was Idle No More, if anybody remembers that. and and so as a water resource specialist, I realized that there was a lot of special education of the community and of fellow activists that needed to be done, because we were trying to teach our fellow community members about how important the water was, but we were lacking data, science, connections. And so I started with Indigenous relations to water as my first teach-in presentation. And I was doing that as I was a water resource specialist for an intertribal agency where I trained drinking water operators to run their water and wastewater plants. And so that was before that, I had worked for my tribe, the Blood Tribe, as a water resource specialist. And I ended up quitting because a signed contract for a frac negotiation came to my desk signed. And I didn't get to look at it before it was signed. And they flew my tribal council out on a Friday and said it needed to be signed by a Monday, and then gave them like a $5,000 bonus in the United States in a really fun town, and then like a 3-inch document to read through by Monday and sign. So that's how industry is negotiating with tribal nations, and I think it's really unfair and unjust. And it kind of goes back to my grandpa. White Calf was a chief of the Blackfeet Nation, and he was a chief during the starvation winter periods. And so he, under duress, signed away Glacier National Park, and that's what they were holding out for, and holding rations and payment of lands lost, because they wanted Glacier National Park. So they got it. And if you haven't muted your mic, maybe just mute your mic. So my programs, let me move my screens around here a little bit. As Dr. Sharashi said, I have an IV mapping program, and that's what I started as a water resource specialist, because I was also doing environmental impact statements, and I was relying on the memories of elders in the community and individuals who had worked for a few decades at the level of a consultation manager for industry. All of their memory, their knowledge, and their life work was going with them when they retired or passed away. And so as a new water resource professional and cultural professional in my community, I wanted to make sure that we captured everything that we know of the land. And I thought that this could become a culturally appropriate watershed assessment model, because they send us out there as tribal nations to document our significant sites when industry is going to have some activity in that area, and it's all done on memory. And so I'm creating this database, which is broken up into many different programs that I'll talk about today. And right now, the focus of the programs, I call it the Disease and Contaminant Mapping Project. And I'm currently, since I'm a scientist, and have done field projects before, I have the Disease and Contaminant Mapping Project, and I'm being trained as a dog handler and using conservation working dogs to look at mink and otter scat that we take to the lab and analyze for heavy metals and pharmaceuticals, which is the first new one. And this is the first time, this is an EPA supported project. And this is the first time that an EPA quality assessment project plan has ever had traditional ecological knowledge mentioned in it as a basis for study methodology. And also the first time that an EPA document will be using conservation working dogs as part of the methodology for finding our samples. I also do MMIW maps for different nations and groups that request them, and significant place maps like the Blackfoot place map, which is those significant sites that are intended to be added to the disease and contaminant mapping to get a better idea of how our significant sites are being impacted by cumulative activity, because in environmental impact statements, we don't do cumulative activity. We only do current activity to assess the impact that the land will have by any given activity. To get all of this out, our fee for services are the culture humility trainings. I train trainers and I give a certificate. And my mentor is Dr. Melanie Turvalon, and her and Dr. Jan Marie Garcia from the Oakland Bay area in Berkeley have developed a curriculum that kind of replaces an insufficient notion of cultural competency. There is absolutely no way that any one individual can be competent in anyone's culture, as I am not a fully competent Blackfoot woman, and it takes an entire community of Blackfoot women that I rely on to be competently Blackfoot. And so I am only given the power and privilege of one family's aspect or perspective of keeping our culture and those cultural traditions, knowledge, protocols, values, all of that. And so I just have a piece. It takes a whole community, and that's what we try to teach with cultural humility, is that your workplaces, your institutions are made up of many individuals that come from highly diverse backgrounds with many feelings and maybe or maybe not many microaggressions on a daily that impact our work. So I try to minimize those with environmental culture humility, and working through culture humility, kind of reflecting on our own assumptions and biases that we carry as individuals, and then reflecting on how, when a group of people come together, that can really steer the ship of an organization, and everyday language and everyday interactions are your company or your organization's culture. Our other fee for service is the food forest retreat, and I'll get more into that because there's funner pictures than what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna play with my windows here. Okay, step in the way a little bit. All right, there we go. Okay, so this is me and my administrative assistant and intern, Selena Gray, and she's Blackfeet and Little Shell, and she came on as an intern last year, and both of us got trained and certified in dog handling and dog detection and doggy first aid. And then this is the upper picture is us out in the field, and I'm just doing my regular water parameters, which is pH, temperature, dissolved oxygen, fun stuff that we take to parallel the dog data that we're collecting. It's an EPA supported project. It's my first time having an EPA grant and writing a QAP, which is an entirely new learning curve for me, and something I'm working on as soon as we'll turn the power button off on this presentation. This project, to what started this project is my background in mining contamination cleanup, and as a cultural practitioner of Blackfoot traditions and activities, field, land, water, all kinds of traditional activities. And I'm still learning which direction my mouse button goes. But as you can see here, what I started getting worried about was the spread of chronic wasting disease, because chronic wasting disease is a new disease that's coming across the land, which is really like bovine spinal encephalopathy, a BSE is what they call it, and it's mad cow. And so similarly, chronic wasting disease is a prion disease too, where the prions which are usually in a really nice helix formation, get really scrambled. And then the deer become very thirsty. They have drooping heads, they lose fear to predators, and it's 100% fatal, and it's usually within 2 years. Countries like Norway are looking at extinction models for white reindeer, and nearly 30% of newborn calves in cervids are being born with it, 100% fatal within 2 years. And so this has big major implications for many things, hunting industry, land management, keeping ecosystems functioning and whole, harvesting and hunting rights of the Blackfoot people and many other tribes, which are beyond reservation lines. And so the health of the land will determine the health of the people, and depending on how much activity is on the land, essentially will determine like the strength and the quality of Blackfoot culture that's able to be practiced, because it's so land, plant, and animal dependent. So what I did here is, you can see how CWD is spreading across the land. And then this here is my little reservation there. And this is the Blackfeet Reservation. And what I did is I set up a sampling fence on the eastern perimeter of my reservation, because we found our first positive here at the X. And we're assuming that everything on this eastern boundary is positive. Everything near Glacier National Park is pristine, because the nearest positive is found over here in Libby. See if I can. This is a picture from the Sweetgrass Hills site, which is a sacred site for many tribal nations, all the tribal nations in Montana. And you can see here we've got some raccoon prints, some beaver prints, and some mink and otter tracks here. Mink, beaver, and raccoon is all here. And what this orange stuff is acid mine drainage. And so we have our cultural keystone species walking through acid mine drainage in some of our places. How this impacts our cultural activities is that we're no longer able to collect herbs, medicinal plants, and like sweat lodge materials from these creek areas, because they're contaminated with the heavy metals. So this is my team up here. This is Ruger. He was one of the first conservation working dogs trained by conservation working dogs for conservation. He came from the Blackfeet Reservation and was trained. He was aggressive and blind, and they were going to euthanize him, but working dogs took him and trained him. And he went to Zimbabwe to a game range, and he successfully stopped thousands and thousands of bullets, guns, hundreds of poachers and rhino horns, and illegal game hunting from happening in a game range. And so he's a real hero to me. And these are the new dogs that I'm working with on my Blackfeet CWD and contaminant study. These are the dogs Sully and Frost. They're helping us find all the mink and otter poop that we'll take to the lab. We didn't let them walk through this stuff. A visual assessment said that their paws and any little sips of the water would probably be more harmful to them than beneficial to us. So we crawled through this area and looked for one of these mink poos, and we found one. So we'll be taking that to the lab and seeing exactly what's in this soup here. This is my new dog. His name's Kenny, and he's going to be trained on aquatic invasive mussels, and we're going to be doing boat checks. And he's also going to be a search and rescue dog live find, because that's part of our MMIW program. And these are my dog ladies, my intern, and this Dr. Richards is the lady who, she's very humble, but she wrote the book on conservation working dog detection and environmental projects and sampling. So pretty awesome lady, and she is so shy to give herself credit for it. I just love her. So some of the things I'm mapping and looking at are public source data, and what we have here, the black dots and the red dots, are a combination of Montana abandoned mines, AML priority areas. Those are abandoned hard rock mines on BLM public lands and property. We have abandoned coal mines here. And then some of the other things I'm mapping are frac wells. These are the locations of all the frac wells in the area. These are the locations of all of the Board of Oil and Gas wells in the area. And this is what it looks like when you put them all together. And the heavily shaded areas are where we're finding major contamination of CWD and high susceptibility of spread. And I just look at data correlations and see if there's anything matching anything in there. So the Blackfoot place mapping, I take cultural educators, cultural keepers, elders, Native youth and university students who are usually part of ethics, TEK classes out onto the land. We do a fall and a spring field trip, and this year we're going to be doing a 6-day caravan trip, which is going to be kind of exciting. Oh, my window is in the way again. Okay. And we go out and we look at the teepee rings, the mountain ridges, the cairns, and in this particular valley here, we're standing in the middle of a camp that has about 120 teepee rings, which would be about 700 to 900 individuals strong. And so there's only a couple of miles, less than a mile downstream here, and then you run into another camp of 100. And so every single tributary to the Missouri looks like this one here, which is the North Fork of Deep Creek. The Blackfoot place mapping I use as that watershed assessment tool, identity building, cultural knowledge transfer opportunities, field trips, classroom visits. We do 3D printing of the map and the mountains. And then if it's cold and the class doesn't want to go out, we'll print the mountains out and bring the elder into the classroom to tell stories about the mountain. And then the kids can paint the mountains as they listen to the story. And we're working on getting the interactive story map turned into a travel app. And this is what the Blackfoot place map looks like right now. And I've worked with my elders. I work with about 13 people in all 4 of the nations who are in some kind of like mapping or cultural specific job, or just they are just known to be storytellers and culture keepers. And we've translated most of the our places in Montana and Alberta. What I found with my Blackfoot place mapping is that it's much larger than any other nation in history would like to give us credit for. So all of the historic maps were usually written by an interpreter of an enemy tribe. And so they would say, you know, they go to that river. And then usually that's where the battle starts. Somewhere right in here is like good battle territory. But we have 4 states and 4 provinces that I've mapped significant sites in. And on all the way down here in Idaho, we were fighting a fur trapper because they were trapping in our territory. And so I'm working to fill in all of the stories here in the Rocky Mountains where we've been removed from the narrative a lot, but we have the internal history and can identify the different markings. Cairns are something that I'm really trying to work hard to save. It has a huge amount of climate data and seasonal data if they are untouched. And right now, national parks and state parks are advocating for them to be kicked over. But people aren't able to tell the difference between historic, prehistoric cairns and the ones that hippies make in the riverways and creek sides. So Blackfoot people typically never made the cairns like this in low valley level rivers and creeks. We made them up high on the ridges, on the hills, and on the mountaintops here as fasting locations. And each rock was brought up by a person who committed to a fast and said their prayers there. And usually within these areas are a fasting shelter associated with the cairn. And so now we have the tools and the ability to put little tents over these with some anthropology equipment, put a tent over it, stick a little straw in there and pull out a soil sample. And that soil sample will have seed banks, carbon dating, and we're able to tell that some of our TB rings up on these high ridges and these cairns are in the realm of 10 to 12,000 years old. And we can tell what time of year we camped there, what we were eating, and what the weather was like. And so there's so much information that's critically that's critical that we keep these cairns protected and saved. And I cannot get close enough to the superintendents and the directors of the national parks to offer my free training to their rangers so that we can keep this data within humanity, because it's a crime against humanity if these are kicked over and we lose that data, not only what we lose culturally from them being kicked over. I also map out pictographs and I get these translated because right now anthropology is saying they're completely mysterious and unknown and put there by an unknown people, but the elders I'm working with, we can translate all of the heavy shields. We can tell which people they belong to by how many feathers they have on their head, or different designs that are found within the shields. And we can tell what happened on battlefields, and if a camp was attacked by a virus. A lot of times this is what viruses and pictographs and winter count hides, like the hide behind me, looks like. And then we have like knobby figures into the pictographs. And so this is a knobby figure, and this looks like it has a line across the head, which would be the Blackfeet nation of the Blackfoot, the four nations. Each one has a different symbol for how they draw their body, but this is a knobby body with arms here, and the traditional square body with a phallic symbol here between the legs. Which is what we see better here. And this is actually formed from rocks that are out on the prairie, that are the same knobbies that you will see found on pictograph walls. The other things I map are war lodges. This war lodge, I have a consensus of about 6 people, elders and knowledge keepers, who say that this one is old based on how grown in it is. And there's some chipping on each one of the ends of the posts and where this one was found. Makes it older, so pre-reservation, mid 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s. Our Beaver Lodge Food Forest is one of our new projects. I had 24 acres of land in New York State donated to my organization, and we're making it into a Beaver Lodge Food Forest, where we're going to have a camp, an artist retreat, and environmental cultural education, oil, language of the Delaware, Lenape, and Onondaga, Oneida people who inhabited the area and have been removed by the Clinton Sullivan campaign, which was a campaign by the US government, which went through this southern area of New York and burned all the long houses down. What we're going to be doing there is part of an extended part of my CWD study, and we're going to do Blackfoot style traditional burning at different frequencies to see how that affects the prion, because we heard from Aboriginal Assembly of First Nations in Canada that is one of the things that is weakening the prion is successive high heat, but not flash heat. There's nothing right now that can kill the chronic wasting disease prion. This is what the land looks like. And there's a lot of rock structures on that land as well that predate settlement that are pretty interesting to look at. A little out of my element compared to Blackfoot rocks. Our final and not least program is the MMIW self-defense, the MMIWarriors program. This transitioned from what I called a life spa retreat that I held for young girls in foster care. Because we experience 3 times more violence than the average woman in America, I modeled my MMIW program off of a self-defense program found in Indiana state high schools. And they followed those girls in high school from the 70s into college. And they found that those girls who took self-defense in high school had 50% less violence encountered in their college age years. And so I wanted to write that stat over to Indigenous communities and women and just all people of color. And so this is an awesome program that's really exciting, and a lot of people have picked it up, especially in the West. So we're in Montana, Washington, Idaho, Oregon, Nevada, Las Vegas, Utah, and Arizona with that, either giving individual gym sponsorships or having group classes like this one. And it really does help. I was attacked once as a young girl at just going home to visit from college, and I was just hanging out with some friends in a basement, and another party came over, and they were not sober. And then they started a fight, and I was able to defend myself because I had been taking 2 months of judo martial arts. And so with the Indiana State High School stats and my own experience, I really believe in self-defense as one of the ways that we can reduce the amount of missing and murdered Indigenous women. We spent a few thousand this year on getting these self-defense kits together. They're very cute. They have a pepper spray, a personal alarm, chapstick, hand sanitizer, a Kubaton, and that's for breaking windshields or reinforcing your fist. If you have, I have big hands, but delicate bones. And so if I had to, when I saved myself, I ended up doing a judo kick because I got scared to let them within arm's reach. But that's what the training did, is it literally slowed down time, where I had time to hum and haw as she was running towards me, to be like, should I kick? Should I punch? Should I kick? Wait, let me check my stance. Am I blocked up? Will she push me over? I had time to think about all of that as she's running towards me. And you want your body to be trained to know what to do when you're in a state of fight or flight, because you have a better chance of getting out of it. Here's our culture humility. The principles of culture humility work really good for an individual before you take them into an institution. We can't ask institutions to do what our individuals will not do. And so it's a really hand-in-hand partnership between employees, leadership, and the organization. The principles are a lifelong process of critical self-reflection and self-critique, redressing the power imbalances in the patient-provider dynamic, and developing mutually beneficial, and we should put non-paternalistic partnerships with communities on behalf of individuals and defined populations. And then you use and build on all three of those principles to advocate and maintain institutional accountability. And so we ask individuals and the institutions to make this a continual everyday process, and hopefully have a better, because only 30% of I don't know what that means. I don't know what's going to happen. Okay, there we go. So we do have a fundraiser. I'm ready to hire more people for each one of these jobs. We're dependent on contractors. And right now I'm the only full-time employee. We just turned 8 years old this year. And for the last 5 years, we've been subsisting on a $100,000 grant every year. And so I've built these programs from that. And then I'm still not getting paid as much as I was when I was a water resource specialist, but I'm getting there. And if you can write this address down for our GoFundMe, that money will be distributed between all of the programs that I spoke about. Thank you, everybody. Did I fly through that fast enough or too fast?
Oh, that was perfect. It was so many wonderful things about the organization, the projects that you kind of pioneered, and like where you've seen a need and just kind of jumped in there to like respond to it and take leadership with that. That's been really kind of wonderful to hear about. So no, it was a perfect amount of time. We do have a lot of people in our Zoom here, so I want to open it up to questions from our participants. Someone said, can you put the GoFundMe in the chat? And I think that'll be a great idea. And if we could just use the raised hand function to ask questions, that way we can make sure everyone gets a chance to speak and ask their question or share their comments. I don't want to have to miss anyone. Or you can type it into the chat too, and I can read it out for Souta. Stefan.
Hi, thank you. Oh, I'm muted, I think. Am I not muted? Not muted.
I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much for that really inspiring talk. And thank you for all the work that you do regarding environmental justice, indigenous sovereignty, and so on. I'm curious, you mentioned that one of your grants is through the EPA, and I'm wondering to what degree like the Canadian and the US governments are receptive to the findings from your own research. It seems like they are in some ways receptive, given that the EPA has supported your work, but I imagine there's a lot more work that can and needs to be done. So I'm just curious as to like at what degree we see governmental support, maybe even industry support for the changes that need to happen based off of the findings of your work.
well, I'm not well funded yet, so that's the level of support. And I really caused a lot of trouble at the EPA with my project because I was at first in the environmental justice program, and I was awarded by EPA headquarters, and then they moved me to EPA Region 8, which is Montana area. And EPA Region 8 had no idea how I got my award and or why it was approved. And they told me this, and I had never been spoken to like that as a grantee who had won an award. And so we went back and forth for a while, and they found out that my project was a priority of EPA headquarters, but the regional office didn't have the capacity to support the program or even know of EPA headquarters awarding me this. And so they moved me from the small environmental justice program to an emerging contaminants program. And that emerging contaminants opened up access to a quality assessment project plan professional to help me write the first time QAP that has never been developed for dogs or traditional ecological knowledge. But it was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears at the beginning, and they asked me to quit.
I'm sorry to hear that. I don't know if there's any other questions in the chat or being raised, but if I could ask a follow-up, would that be okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, go for it.
Well, I think you've already kind of elaborated on some of the like pros and cons of working with like national federal entities. I'm wondering if you can go like further into that. Like, what are your experiences over the past year? It seems maybe longer. Like, what are the kind of benefits, detriments of working with the federal government on issues like this?
Once we got it sorted out and where I belonged and I didn't quit, when I got into the emerging contaminants, that's when they were able to open up more resources and support to me, so to speak. And the project has been moving along a lot better with those, just the QAP specialist helping me write the first time QAP ever for dogs and TEK. In terms of like support for small grassroots organizations and first-time federal contractors or people of color getting access into these areas, I probably need more support in terms of like that fundraiser that I shared of hiring on a bookkeeper and an accountant. And a lot of the grants that have been offered to me sometimes require a voluntary federal audit, which got that quoted at $10,000 to $13,000, which could be like a good 10% of our budget. And so you have to make like business type decisions of, do I invest 10% of my budget to become, visually, fiscally trustable to donors? And so there's decisions like that I have to make on a daily basis, where if I had access to more resources and money, I could just hire the person and the accountant, get it done, and then have access to the larger grants that would keep us going 3 to 5 years.
Thank you.
Other questions, folks? Okay, so while people are thinking about their questions, I just want to ask you, where do you feel you have the most impact with the work that you're doing, especially in the area of like the digitization of what you're finding, right? And like doing the mapping and the podcast, like where do you feel you're having the most impact in terms of bringing attention to the issues, in terms of kind of distributing your findings, to a wider community, for even Indigenous communities to like learn more about what the issues are and what opportunities there might be to kind of engage themselves and kind of jump in and participate, right? So I'm just curious about where you feel your greatest impact is.
I think that is deciphering and communicating it all through the podcast. And surprisingly, somehow our target audience, that's like our primary funder, which is for adolescent women and girls, is the primary listeners of our podcast as well, except it goes from women to 18 to 45. And we constantly, almost on a weekly basis, get emails, comments that it's nice to hear somebody talking about the things that we talk about, and that they feel like nobody has talked about them, or that they have support, or that there's somebody else feeling, because we take it from just two Native ladies kind of navigating the world, and the views and voices are our own, and we wanted it to have the feel of just two aunties just dealing with life, sitting at the kitchen table, catching up. And that's kind of the feel it has. And everybody thinks that they're sitting down and visiting with us when we're going through these things. And we kind of hash out the emotions that we feel with some major things. And I think that that has created a lot of support because a lot of our MMIW people are listening to that and comment and share and take us on road trips with them. So yeah, the comments that we get back from that podcast has been the most heartfelt. And then some of the MMIW stuff that we do that is like self-defense sponsorship and just caring about our fellow community members.
That's wonderful. I see a comment and a question in the chat. Nathan says, thank you so much for your presentation. What are the ways that we as members of the SDSU community can support you and your work?
So if you're an educator, or even if you're just an interested person, every mapping project of mine, like the significant site mapping, I'm just doing the Blackfoot Placemap as a prototype map to prove what can be done when one individual tallies up all those resources. What we need to do is we need all 587 tribes in the US and all 260 some in Canada to do a place map for each one of them. If they're alive, we need sister tribes to do it for tribes that have been exterminated. And we need to tally up a big significant site map, because you can see the frac maps and the oil and gas maps and the abandoned mine maps that I work off. They're pretty busy, right? And then you would have a significant site map or a cultural use or heritage site map over that, which would look pretty sparse unless you're talking to the people. So if you're a Kumeyaay member or friend in the area, go to my website and go to the IVMapping page. There's a submit a report form, and you can put in the story, the picture, and help change narratives, because a lot of narratives, especially in the eastern states, are still having aggressive language that justifies extermination, massacres, killing, removal. And in New York, where my property is for the food forest, there's bronze placards that say the Clinton and Sullivan campaign came through here to calm down the aggressive and hostile Indians. And so what that does for children who are just learning about settler and Indigenous history and relations and perceptions and forming their own assumptions and biases to continue on into the world, as it just continues the violence. And so I don't seek to remove those. I seek to educate about them and show what kind of world that makes when we advocate and justify the massacre and burning of villages. So please fill out a form and I'll get an intern to create a map. Thanks, Nathan.
That's wonderful. I'm also curious, as you were talking about, submitting a form and having somebody create the map. I'm also curious about if you would be willing to teach some of our students how to create the maps, right? And so I'm thinking students in American Indian Studies here. I'm also thinking about students in geography. I think there might be an interest in kind of creating maps if they know kind of how to do that and like what all it would take to do it. So I'm curious about if we were to bring you and your interns out here to do like a 1 or 2 day workshop, like would that be something that you would be up for doing?
That would be really fun. I would ask that people pick out 1 to 4 or as many sites as you want, and then have like a picture or the location address or lat long. And then we'll have all of the information, any dialogue or narrative that you want to go with that. And then we can spend less time on searching for those things and actually putting together the map.
Absolutely. And then where would the maps be kind of archived or like housed, or like is there a specific place, like some sort of like database that you kind of keep your maps in, or like are they accessible to other people? Like how do we get it out there?
So all of our maps, I have private maps, contracted maps, and public maps, and all of those maps are housed and are accessible through my website. If it's not accessible and it gives you a login prompt, that means one of my public access layers have been removed or made private, and I have to go in there and individually toggle off that layer, which is problematic for like the what's in your water map, which has 40 different data layers and over 80,000 data points to start looking at what's in your water across the nation. But I think if they, I'm sorry, I lost the question. Sorry, Dr. Sureshi. Can you ask that again?
Sorry, just kind of thinking about like where, you know, a place, whether it's like.
Oh yeah, yes, where they're housed. So I'm part of the Indigenous Mapping Collective. And they taught me how to map because I'm the water hydrologist and storyteller. And so they sent me to mapping workshops in Vancouver and in Toronto. And the Indigenous Mapping Collective has international conferences every year to teach these basic mapping skills. And so I could either bring in one of them or do it for myself. But it's a pretty easy, and all of the stories would be housed if it's made through my account at the Indigenous Mapping Collective domain host site.
Wow, that's beautiful. I see another question, well, a couple questions. Stefan asked for the website and that I posted up there. If there's other links to your projects outside of the IV website, Souta, please go ahead and add those links in here. And then Ali asked, how has using the dogs helped enhance your research collections?
Well, using the dogs has actually had a really surprising impact, because when I was doing one of my community outreach and update meetings, I told them that the first year that we went out, we did a 64-kilometer run along different creeks, rivers, and lakes. And out of that 64 kilometers, we only found 12 individual mink and only 6 otters, which is not enough to make a traditional shirt or stand-up headdress or split horn headdress or any kind of anything that we traditionally used mink and otter for. So it really, initially it had the huge impact of alerting our community cultural practitioners about the almost non-existent population of mink and otter. And then using the dogs, the Sweetgrass Hills is a really good example of, it took us 3 hours out there to find one 20-millimeter piece of scat. 20 millimeters, about the size of a peanut. And they're smaller than that. They could be anywhere from 10 to 20 millimeters big, and they look exactly like dirt. And so when we train dogs to detect scat, then we can collect a matter of 40 scats in that same amount of hours that we spent crawling around looking for one. So it speeds up the work, and that's across the board. The working dog professionals use an example of where they went looking for mountain lion scat to test the genetics and population of mountain lions in a project area. And it's like trying to find gold if you go out looking for mountain lion scat. And I, as a mountaineer, so the Blackfoot Placemap has made me a mountaineer. I have to climb to the top of these mountains. But I have seen scat way up there because it's mostly like rocks and boulders. But when you get down into the lowlands, mountain lion scat and any scat from wild animals and predators, besides bears, are generally pretty hard to find. So it speeds up the work, it makes it faster, and it also makes it much cheaper, because there could be 4 of us out there looking for 16 hours over 2 days, and we would find 5 versus 2 dogs over 3 days, and we come home with 60 scats. Still not that much for the historical population levels. And that's where we use TEK as well, because we ran all of our environmental data through a NASA statistical model to predict where mink and otter habitat would be to make our sample site determinations. And NASA came back and said there's no suitable mink and otter habitat, but Blackfoot people have all kinds of creation stories, and our beaver bundle story is a story that tells of cohabitation with other species, man included, mink and otter and all of the other aquatic riparian area animals. And so I use that TEK to determine that there are mink and otter there, and they are probably existing next to beaver lodges, which is where I put my sites down, and we found that small population of individuals.
Wow, there's so much, like, just the generations of Indigenous knowledge that you're working with is just so wonderfully impressive, as sort of like a counter to, you know, what NASA and all these sort of like, you know, publicly elevated sources of information and knowledge claim to be able to tell us, right? And so I really want to kind of highlight that as well in what you just shared. We're at 10:58, and I want to see if anyone has any kind of burning question that they want to ask before we close out our session today. If you don't, that's also fine. Anyone with a question? No, it doesn't look like anyone has a question. Well, thank you so much, Souta, for joining us today for this wonderful presentation. Thank you for your permission to record the session. We will have it posted on our YouTube channel probably within the week. Thank you for taking the time, for sharing so much about your organization and the wonderful, important work that you're doing. I know we will certainly be in touch with you to try to bring you back to campus, to get you working with our students, and try to see how we as a community, you know, located on Indigenous land and with a certain kind of awareness about that, how we can kind of plug into the work that you're doing as well. So thank you so much.
I look forward to that future work. Thank you, everybody.